So this was in South America. We're working with these villagers in this small village off the coast of the rainforest in Guyana. And one night we were on the phone with one of our students, and she was saying that her boyfriend was going to be coming over to her house, but she was scared because her boyfriend was physically abusive. So, I asked my wife, like, do you think I should go over there? And my wife conferred with the student and asked if she would feel better if I came by. And the student was like, yes, please come. So there I went. I ventured off down the dusty trails in the night, and I arrived at the student's house. We'll call her Bridget. And Bridget was there, and she's like, hey, thank you for being here. Yeah, I just don't know. Sometimes he gets really upset, and, I appreciate you being here. And I'm like, well, I'm thinking in my head, if this guy comes, definitely with me here, he's not going to literally just start beating his girlfriend. In fact, I had even done sessions with him before. So I'm thinking probably I have his respect, and he's not just going to show up and just come in with that level of rage and violence. Sure enough, he shows up, and he shows up with rage and violence. And right in front of me, he just starts beating his girlfriend. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, I have never seen anybody just go do that. It's not like we were family or something, just right in front of me, so bold and just blatant. So I went to get help because I'm like, I can't just jump in here and start grabbing this guy, but I got to do this the legal way. So I got on a phone, and I'm trying to figure out, how do you call the police in this village? Because, I'm not in America, so is it 911? I don't even know, right? And I see the police coming down the road because I had contacted my wife, and I guess she called them. And then the police are coming, and I run up to them, and I'm like, first of all, is domestic violence illegal in this country? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, follow me. And they come, and they arrest the guy, the boyfriend, and they take him off to spend the night in jail. The next day I find out that the girlfriend went and got him out of jail. Trauma bonding is a term that has become popular to describe the very illogical connection between the abuser and the abused person. You may have a parent or a boyfriend or a girlfriend that's abusive. And the trauma bond is basically where it feels counterintuitive the way that you or the abused person is connected to the abuser. So whereas we would expect if someone is abused, they would hate their abuser, or they would at least repudiate them to the extent that they would want to be away from them. They would reject their abuser, so we would assume. But the trauma bond explains the phenomena of the fact that instead, those who are abused often feel attached to their abuser. They don't reject them. In fact, they may go as far as to protect their abuser. They may actually justify the actions of their neglector or their abuser. So if you had emotionally neglectful parents, you may say, well, my abuse wasn't that bad. It was just emotional. If you have physically abusive parents, you may say, well, my mom was going through a lot. Or, well, you don't understand in the black culture, you don't understand in the Mexican culture, or you don't understand in the Puerto Rican culture, or you don't understand we're German, or you don't understand my dad's Irish. And all this justification is going on, and you're missing the point that it's still abuse. And if you were a child, then it's child abuse. And if you're a spouse, then it's domestic abuse, but abuse is abuse. It doesn't matter whether we're in the jungles of South America or we're here in the United States. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what they were going through. It's abuse. And I find that with a lot of clients, it's very hard for them to understand and to accept that it's abuse, especially when it's their mom. And something about that bond with it being a mother. And they're like, yeah, but my mom, she was really going through a lot. All moms are going through a lot. And I'm not saying your mom wasn't going through the most, but it doesn't excuse child abuse. Regardless, not even on a moral high horse, you just have to be able to recognize technically that it is abuse. But when there's a trauma bond, it's like it's even hard sometimes to do that. And you may be able to get there and admit, okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. She was wrong. That was abuse. But it's like, okay, so what do you think about putting a boundary there, putting a separation? So if it was emotional abuse, separating yourself emotionally from that person. No, I can't do that. It's my mom. Or this could be the same, it's my dad, or it's my husband, or it's my girlfriend, or it's my boyfriend. And there's this dissonance, this difficulty to see them as they really are. And so to understand trauma bonding, there's the example of Stockholm Syndrome. And Stockholm Syndrome, and I'm being very, very general, but basically there was a hostage situation, and the syndrome got named after this situation, by in which the people who were held hostage became so close to the people who were holding them hostage that they actually began to view their abusers with an attachment, or almost as if their abusers were their friends. And this is where we get this concept of Stockholm Syndrome. So when it came time for them to get arrested by the police, they're actually defending their abusers. They're actually saying, no, like, you guys got to go easy on them. You don't understand what they've been through. They did a lot for us. And all of that is happening because of this trauma bond. And so they call that Stockholm Syndrome. And so today this can happen inside of the family, where you're essentially showing what would be like a Stockholm Syndrome, this love for your own abusers. For those who go through complex trauma, it can almost become like an obsession with their abusers, or a belief that their abuser is like omnipotence, like God or something like that. But ultimately, it's characterized by attachment, dependence, and the cycle of abuse. It can be any of those, it can be all of those. So when we talk about attachment, we're talking about the fact that babies form attachment almost like as a means of survival, right? It's just imprinted in their DNA that they should attach to their caregiver. So with children, you can understand why they would continue to be attached, looking for comfort, looking for support. And when your main source of support is the abuser, and you're still looking for support from the abuser, you have a trauma bond created that can be very difficult to break. Because, well, look at it. If it hasn't broken now, to just walk away for logical reasons like you would be able to do in a healthy relationship, it seems crazy. That's why trauma bonds are so hard to break. Dependence would be the other characteristic, which is basically that you're depending on the person for some type of supply. So it could be you're depending on them for food and water, you're depending on them for shelter. It can be that you just depend on them for emotional support, which that's not to be taken lightly. Your emotional needs are still needs. But what happens is when you have that dependence on a person for your emotional needs, and the person that you're depending on is your abuser, you have formed a trauma bond. And so when we get caught up in thinking that moms and daughters should have a tight bond, therefore I will have a tight bond with my mom, or I will hold out hope that we can have a tight bond. Meanwhile, your mom makes no effort to be a decent human being. She continues to tear you down with her words. And I've even met some adult daughters who are still being physically beat by their mothers. The fact that you're staying in the relationship at the capacity you are is a trauma bond. It is unhealthy. It is not a sign of mental health. The other characteristic that I mentioned is the cycle of abuse. The cycle of abuse is basically they do something wrong, they say they're sorry. They do something wrong, they say they're sorry. And their remorse, it's so heartfelt, it may be a lot of tears. And it hits you. You start to develop a sympathy for your caregivers when you're trauma bonded with them. You may have a romantic connection with them. And so you don't want to lose your romantic connection. So since they've apologized, you feel like, hey, they've given me a basis to let this go. I'm just going to let it go. And you got to forgive. And you may start to cite religious ideas like forgiveness as a basis to open yourself up for future abuse. But religious or spiritual forgiveness is not based on the concept that you continually reopen yourself up to a person who is in no way truly repentant of what they've done. Because repentance means turning around, stopping, ceasing the old behavior, and going the opposite direction. So if someone has really, really changed, then there's basis for forgiveness. But when someone has not really changed, they've not provided you an actual basis for total forgiveness for them, in the sense that you would open yourself up again. So it's important to understand that using culture, using religion, or spirituality as an excuse for an abuser is a form of a trauma bond. These ideas are not meant to be shelters for abusers. And in our society's viewpoint on women, excusing mothers for abuse, it's unacceptable. Just because they're a mom doesn't mean they're excused from being abusive to their children. I'm sorry. Sorry if that hurts. That's just the way it is. So what you want to do if you want to be able to break away from this trauma bond, or you really wonder why you even need to, recognize that this isn't healthy. Recognize that this is not mental health. So therefore, if it's not mental health, then what is it? Mental illness is essentially believing something that's not true, to put it simple. Right? So you see a man walking down the street and he looks like he's talking to someone, but there's no one else there. And so you would say about him, oh, he must have a mental illness. Why do you say that? Well, because he believes in something that's not true. He believes there's a person there, but there's nobody there. That's mental illness. So if you believe that that your caregiver is something they're not, then that is mental illness. So to have mental health, you have to see them as what they really are. Now, you may be confused because your caregiver can be really loving, really nice, really kind. They might bring you gifts. They might talk to you nicely sometimes. They might be very generous with their money. In fact, they might volunteer in the community, and those things that I just named are some of the main things abusive people and neglectful people will use to sort of bolster up their image and create that dissonance, that confusion for you. But I want to reassure you that a person can have good qualities, but still have a poor nature to them. Or they may have some good qualities and some bad qualities. So it's important to view your parent as they actually are. So you need to do an assessment of your parent. So what you want to do is get out a piece of paper and you want to write down the traits that you see, particularly the bad traits and some of the things you've experienced in your life with your parent. Some things that people would say are abusive. And you write those things down. Then you walk away, go get yourself something to drink, and you come back and you look at your list. But now you're going to look at the list as if this list is about some other child, not you. And it's going to say, this happened to another child, or this happened to another wife, or this happened to another husband, not me. And suddenly you're going to see things differently. And now how do you look at the perpetrator? Now how do you look at the abuser when it's not your husband, or it's not your mom, or it's not your dad, or it's not your girlfriend? Would you view them as abusive based on these things that you wrote down? Write down your observations. Because if you would view them as abusive, if it wasn't you and your loved one, but it was someone else, then that will give you a more accurate viewpoint of your situation. And so now you need to actually amalgamate that viewpoint to your situation, to be in mental health, to see things as they really are. And so the next day you want to come back to this same list and take a look at it and ask yourself, okay, this isn't me, this is someone else. How would I view this? How would I view this if this were happening to a little kid? How would I view it if I witnessed what happened, but it wasn't me, but I was just witnessing it? And again, as you keep looking at it, you realize this is abuse. And now you need to get comfortable with viewing your father or your mother as what they are, a child abuser, or a child neglector, or a neglectful person, or emotionally abusive, or physically abusive. That's not all they are, maybe. They may have some good qualities, so you can write those things down too. They give good gifts. They are very generous. That's great. But they're also a child abuser. So someone can be generous and be a child abuser at the same time. In fact, a lot of child abusers are quite generous to other people, or even their own children at times. You can have parents that are very nice sometimes, but are also emotionally abusive and neglectful. Recognize it. You go over their house and they still have little jabs at you, at your self-worth, your self-esteem, tearing down the way you look, the way you act, what you're doing. You feel like you can't be open around them. You're in an abusive relationship. Can you recognize that? Can you recognize, I'm in an abusive relationship? Can you come back day after day, the next day, and the next day, and recognize this is an abusive relationship? It may take you a few days of reanalyzing it and re-recognizing it, and it may seem so crazy to you. Man, that's so crazy. I don't feel that bad. I thought it would be worse than this. Because we have this idea of an abuser that's really extreme, in an abusive relationship, and a victim, those are really extreme. And then we have ourselves, and we're like, yeah, my mom punches me in the face, and my husband grabs me by the hair and throws me across the room every once in a while, but I'm not abused. Look at it as it really is. Amalgamate these ideas. Understand, this is not monstrous looking people. This is normal looking people like you and your husband, or your mom and your dad. It's just normal folks that are abusers and victims of abuse. Recognize what it really is. Because seeing the truth is mental health. Don't let anyone gaslight you, not even yourself.